Anas, good to see you again. Thank you for doing this, and appreciate you making yourself available.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'm taking the Larry King approach now in my conversations, as I was telling you right before we started recording, because I think it's better, just turn it on and chat, right? And instead of having to retell a story the second time, I think I think this is a good way to do it. And we started talking, and I said, all right, let's go, because I think this is super interesting. And we were talking about, I'm from Northeast Ohio. I live in Arizona. You've spent some time in Ohio, and you love the areas of Ohio, Indiana, and then you also said, because I lived in Pennsylvania at one point, that you've spent some time in Pennsylvania. What were you doing there?
But basically, that's where oil was discovered in the United States in 1859. So I had to go there, basically go through those areas where all those oil wells and all the old farms where oil was discovered and how it was transported to the river from the hills, etc. So I had to go through this area basically just because to get kind of a historic perspective on it. But I will tell you a very important story about one of the trips I made, and it kind of like solved a historic puzzle that was written in history books, but no one knew what was going on. In history books, especially that talks about oil, it talks about how one day in January, people woke up in a small town and they found oil in their water wells. A long time ago, people woke up in the morning, they go to the water wells to get water because that's the only way they get water, and they found oil instead. And someone sent kind of a telegraph to New York, and all of a sudden, businessmen start flooding the area. Everyone wants to buy a piece of that farm and of that town because there is oil. And after all these deals and everything is done, there was no oil. And that's the story. Well, I was walking in one of the old towns in that area, and I found a it's not really a used bookstore. It's kind of like an everything store, but it has a corner that has used books. So I went in and I was fascinated by some of the old maps, etc. I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden I got a small book with no publisher. I mean, just like a homemade book almost. But it's a printed book. And I liked the title, flipped it. It looks like a story, so I picked up some other stuff. Went home, started reading it, and I found out that the guy was talking about this massive fire on the top of the hill that engulfed the newest and the largest hotel in the area. And I checked the date, and it checked with the night before people found oil. And it turns out when people basically were taking the oil in those beer barrels or wine barrels and taking them to the river to ship them, a lot of oil will drop on the ice and snow, and it will be packed. So it seems that this massive fire on the top of the hill melted the snow with the oil, and it went to the wells. And when people woke up in the morning, they found because oil flow above water. So that's what was it. That was a historic puzzle was solved just because I found a small old book in one of the small towns.
So what do you remember what part of Pennsylvania that was in?
Yeah, it's near Oil City.
Oh, so real close to Ohio, Oil City. That makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
right by
pretty close.
Youngstown and
Yeah,
all that.
yes, yes,
Wow, that's only an hour and a half from where I grew up.
yes. And there is something else too, basically about this because and this is kind of very sad story. Rockefeller, who is, I mean, until that time, he was the richest man on earth. Rockefeller basically was very active in the area, and he built a building in late 1800s. It's supposed to be the building, like state of the art building, and that building has an elevator, like an elaborate elevator. For that time, that was like the news in Europe and all over the world. That elevator, by the way, is still operating until today. So they have it. And what happened in that building is the city took over the building because the Rockefeller Foundation seems they donated the building to the city. But what they did is they divided the building into two halves. They used one, and the other half was completely closed. Even the doors basically were blocked by bricks. So on one of the trips I went there, I went to this building. They were all, removing the bricks basically and walking into the old building that no one walks in ages. So I asked them if I can walk in, and they let me in. I walked into one of the rooms, and I found a massive pile of small books like this size, like probably double the size of a credit card. The small books. And those are the small books. That's where the guys who are in charge of the wells basically were writing their daily numbers. And there are thousands of those books. So for Rockefeller, basically, that's how they were collecting the data on the production of all those wells. So you have all the data on the daily production for the whole month, and then you have new other books, etc., but thousands of them. So I went back to the front and I told the lady in charge what you are going to do with them. She said, we are going to throw them away. I said, but this is kind of like really historic stuff. So I called the EIA, which is the energy arm of the DOE, the Department of Energy, and I told them about it. And they said, yeah, we would love to take care of it, but we don't have any money and our budget was cut. And all of that was thrown away and gone, and that's it.
You couldn't get a book or two, huh? They wouldn't give you one?
Well, they won't. I tried at least to get some souvenir or something like this, and they said, well, the guy who was with me, he was like hesitant because he did not know really who owns them and what are the legal status of them and all that stuff. So he was very careful with it. But that was one of the saddest stories that I encountered personally, where you find a treasure trove and the government should have taken care of it, and they say we don't have money.
And all that data and all those books, you were able to look through them.
I mean, just numbers. I mean, definitely someone who is familiar with the way business was conducted at that time will have a complete interpretation of what they have. But it was very clear that it has daily production and daily information of every well that Rockefeller was running at that time in that area.
Was it in a vault when you were in there at all, or was it out in the open, those books?
No, basically, they were in that building that was closed for a very long time, and then they opened it. By the time I went there, they kind of opened a few doors and they let me in.
Because I think of that, you telling that story. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. But that was probably a more secure way of storing data than maybe today stuff that's on the cloud.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Especially no one knew about it because people thought it was just an old building.
Because anything today, everything is hackable, and it makes you think. Maybe writing passwords and information on notepads is better than storing anything in.
Well, one of the questions basically that came to mind at that time, those books stayed in a very good shape throughout, and I think this is one of the reasons why. If you look at that building, the doors are very big. And then on top of every door, there is, even inside, there are those windows that can open and they allow the air to go through. So that's the cooling system they had. So I think the flow of air in the building was just amazing, and it was enough to preserve these books.
And plus, back then they made buildings that were built to last, not the stuff that they're putting out there today. Everything looks the same.
Absolutely.
What is at the top of your mind right now in relation to your work?
Well, we have a lot of things, but most of the calls I'm getting and most of the speaking engagements I'm getting are related to the geopolitics of energy, especially when it comes to Venezuela and Iran and what's going on with OPEC Plus and what is the future of the energy industry in general, what is the future of oil prices, natural gas prices, what is the role of AI and technologies, electric vehicles. Remember last time we talked about electric vehicles. So these are the topics, but the geopolitics basically is the dominant subject these days.
Yeah, you wrote something interesting on X in relation to the Venezuelan oil and how the United States Canada's oil is cheaper to refine than Venezuela. And if I'm getting this wrong, correct me. But Trump says it's all about the oil, about the oil, about the oil in Venezuela.
Well, let me explain it in a different way because we do have many rumors, and in our reports, basically, we debunked all those rumors, and I just focus on the major ones. One of the rumors that is very common among the left and people in Europe and the Middle East and other places in the world is that the only reason why Trump is interested in Venezuela and he wanted to go to Venezuela basically is oil. And he wanted to control the 300 plus billion barrels of reserves. And they continue saying, look, the refineries on the Gulf Coast were configured basically to handle the Venezuelan crude, and therefore those refiners want that crude. So, in other words, Trump wants to control the Venezuelan oil to satisfy the U.S. thirst for oil. Here is the problem with that. The first problem is we've been hearing those rumors about every single war that the U.S. been involved in the last 50 years. They said it about Iraq, and we know now it wasn't about oil because the U.S. did not get anything out of Iraq, and the U.S. companies basically got almost nothing. It was the Chinese who signed the contracts and made the money. They said it before about Afghanistan. We know nothing happened in Afghanistan. They said it about Yemen. They said it about Sudan. They said it about Syria. Now they are saying it about Venezuela. And for Venezuela, basically, the story is not like what people are thinking. And all the evidence that we are learning about every single day now proves the point that it is not about oil. And people say, well, look, Trump himself mentioned oil so many times, and therefore it must be about oil. Well, let's talk about it. First of all, Trump is saying, look, the Venezuelan government changed its constitution and they nationalized the oil. They took over the assets of the American oil companies and they did not pay them compensation. The U.S. oil companies went for arbitration and they won. And the government of Venezuela owes billions of dollars to the U.S. companies. I want my money. Give me my money. Well, the Venezuelan government is bankrupt. And the only thing they have is oil. Per own constitution, that oil is owned by the government. So the idea here, okay, you nationalize the oil, you own it, and you have nothing but oil. And therefore, I'm going to take over that oil and get my money. So from Trump's point of view, it is about money, not about oil. Which means that if Venezuela basically was producing iron ore, he would have taken over the iron ore. Or just pick up any other metal or any other product. So it's not about oil per se. It is about the money. So that's number one. Number two, about the refiners. The refiners basically switched to Canadian oil. The U.S. imports about 6 million barrels a day of mostly medium sour and heavy sour crude. About 63% of that comes from Canada. Very tiny amount comes from Venezuela. So from Canada, we import about 4 million plus barrels a day. The last data before Maduro arrest was about 170,000 imports from Venezuela. So U.S. refiners basically are getting the Canadian oil. And what's good about the Canadian oil? The Canadian oil is higher quality in general. It's still heavy crude, but it's higher quality. And it comes from massive reserves that comes with very low decline rates. So you have long life reserves with low decline rates. That's not the case in Venezuela. At the same time, you are talking about a stable country with stable contracts, with a marvelous infrastructure. I say marvelous relative to Venezuela. So you have all the good things on one side. Why Trump has to go to Venezuela basically and lose all those benefits from Canada to switch U.S. refiners to Venezuela? And what we are seeing right now is the U.S. imports Venezuelan crude that is extremely heavy, and U.S. refiners deal with it. So from a technical point of view, U.S. refiners are able to deal with it. It doesn't matter. Even we are talking about 10 and 11 API, which is like, this is almost asphalt, almost. Okay? And U.S. refiners take it. So there is no technical issues. The issue is the price. Because yes, you can refine this heavy crude, but that will cost you more. And therefore the price differentials have to be large enough to entice you to get the Venezuelan crude. So the Venezuelan prices basically are not there to attract U.S. refiners in a large quantity to buy the Venezuelan crude. So it cannot be about Trump controlling the Venezuelan crude. The third point, what Trump is doing, especially when he talked about the 30 to 50 million barrels of oil that the U.S. is going to sell it, people misunderstood that too. Of course, I am being apolitical here, so I just want to emphasize this point. I'm not supporting Trump. My part of my job basically is to explain to people what's going on. So I'm just explaining here what's going on. So Trump basically, if you look at Chevron got a license to operate in Venezuela as in a joint venture. And what happened is they can sell only their part of the oil, but their joint venture, the other oil, they cannot sell. So what happened with Chevron is, because of the U.S. blockade of the Venezuelan ports, inventories started rising for Chevron. And if inventories are full, then Chevron cannot produce. So they need to get rid of that oil, but there is a blockade. So what Trump did, he took President Clinton's oil for food deal that was imposed on Iraq in the 90s, literally as is, and implemented it on Venezuela. The only difference between the Clinton's program and the Trump program is that with the Clinton, the UN was involved. Here, the UN is not involved. It's exactly the same program. The program was like this. You cannot sell your own oil. I will take your oil and sell it, and those who are going to buy it, they cannot pay you. There is an escrow account. They have to go and put the money in it. And then we, the United States and the UN, during the Iraq oil for food deal, we will decide how the money is spent. At that time, they divided the money equally between three buckets. So three buckets, one for Kuwait for war reparations, one for the UN operations in Iraq, and the third one for the Iraqi government. But the Iraqi government cannot get the cash. The Iraqi government every month has to submit a list of items it wants to import or buy, and then it will go to the UN, from the UN to the White House, and then the Clinton administration will decide what Iraq will buy and not to buy. So they will get the list, they scratch some out of it, and they will approve some of it. Some of the quantity basically will be half, one of them a third. They have complete control of what Iraq can buy. And then they will allow Iraq to buy it, but the seller has to submit the bills or the receipts to the UN and the US and then they will get their money from the escrow account in the bank. So that's what Trump is exactly doing with the 30 to 50 million barrels that are in storage, whether floating storage or on ships or in onshore storage. That's exactly what he is doing with that. Whether they are going to continue with this to control future production, we don't know, but Trump told us he is going to do it. But it is a copy of the Iraq oil for food deal. And if you look at this again, there is a problem. It proves that Trump is not after the Venezuelan oil, he's after the money. Now they want to sell those, and people said, well, he wants really to cut off China. Well, that is not correct, because now, as we speak, they are offering the same oil to China at a major discount. While we were told that this oil will be sold, excuse me, will be sold at the international price. Yet, it's being sold at a heavy discount. And that makes perfect sense, because there is no way India or China will buy this oil without discount. The question is, will the Chinese buy it? And the reason why I'm saying this, because of various issues. One of them is China stopped importing oil from the United States last May. It stopped importing LNG from the United States last February, which means that they don't want to deal with the United States, period, when it comes to energy. So we will see how this sale is going to go. But that shows that Trump is after the money. He is not after the oil. The oil is going to China, to India, and other places. It's not coming to U.S. refiners.
A couple questions. One, so the program that you're saying is they're copying what the Clintons did in regards to Iraq, and that had to be divvied up three ways. How many is this divvied up? Just with two parties?
The Trump administration said they will do it at their discretion. So we don't know at all. At least that was the Iraqi oil for food deal was clear and agreed on among nations, and it was divided equally into three pockets. Here we don't know. It is at the discretion. Even the president said at his discretion, not only a committee or any other group, etc. But what we know so far is that probably he will pay some of the debt to the companies, although he sent. It's funny because after the Venezuelans agreed, all of a sudden he told the companies, I think he told ConocoPhillips or the CEO of ConocoPhillips to forget about the $12.5 billion they got from arbitration. He told him to forget about it, which again proves the point that he is after the money.
You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like a gangster movie, like Donnie Brasco. You're not paying your bet, so I'm taking your Cadillac, and then I'll be the custodian of an account and determine how it gets administered and how you'll use it.
Well, again, I mean, that was the oil for food deal too. So that's what it is. But there are, of course, when it comes to Venezuela, there are many issues. One of the questions we get all the time, and we did answer it in our reports, on how long it will take Venezuela basically to increase production. Because one of the rumors that's been circulating around the world is that Trump wants to increase production of Venezuela significantly so he can crash the market, reduce gasoline prices, reduce oil prices for Americans forever, and break up OPEC, etc. All these talks and rumors, that does not make sense at all. Why oil companies, oil majors will go spend tens of billions of dollars only to lose all of them? I mean, it just does not make sense. But if you look at the details do not make any sense when it comes to this theory or the rumor. For example, to increase Venezuela's production significantly, we need long time. And in recent days, I've been using an example to illustrate that. So as a rule of thumb, if all stars are aligned and we get $20 billion of investment we can increase 20 billion plus, of course. We can increase Venezuela's production by 1 million barrels a day in 3 years. 1 million barrels a day in 3 years. But in 3 years, this is not going to flood the market. This is not going to be an extra oil. Here is why. Number one, in 3 years, global oil demand will grow between, even if you take the most pessimistic view, between 2 and 4 million barrels a day. So 2 is the pessimistic view, 4 is the optimistic view. So between 2 and 4. So we have growth in demand. Let's take the average, 3 million. And then because of decline rates in the fields, we will lose in those 3 years at least 10 to 12 million barrels a day because of depletion. So after 3 years, I need to compensate on average for 15 million barrels a day to meet global oil demand and at the same time compensate for the declines. 15 million, while Venezuela is adding only 1. So it cannot be that the idea this investment is going to go in and then Venezuela is going to crash the market. Even if it's not 1, even if it's 2 million, even if it's 3 million, it's not going to play that game. It happened in the past, but the past, that was long ago. It happened in 1997, 1998, but that was long ago, and this is not going to be repeated again. The other issue related to this is that, okay, we need 20 billion plus. We need it now. Where this money is going to come from? Is it an additional investment above what companies invest every year? Or companies are going to shift it from other places like the Permian, North Dakota, Canada, Brazil, Nigeria, where this 20 billion is going to come from. If you look at history, you'll find out that they are going to shift this money. They're going to shift it from somewhere else. So by the time Venezuela add 1 million, that 1 million or 800 or whatever amount, that would have been coming from somewhere else, but because we moved investment, we did not get it. And therefore the net is very small, if any. So any way you look at it, it will take time to increase production, and that production increase is not bearish, and it cannot flood the market. It's not going to lower gasoline prices. And from an OPEC point of view, if there is no impact, then there is no impact on OPEC. Period. And I know you like stories, so I will tell you a story about OPEC here, since we are talking about OPEC. I know that many people look at OPEC negatively, including U.S. producers and others. And I read, I have not even searched for confirmation, that President Trump wanted Venezuela to stay in OPEC. But the story that people do not realize is the following. OPEC was established officially in Baghdad in September 1960. But the major announcement to establish the organization was made in Tyler, Texas in May 1960. And the reason why it was announced then, because the Texas independent producers invited the Venezuelan oil minister and the Saudi representative to come and participate in the event, their annual conference. And they literally rolled the red carpet for them because they thought they are comrades who are fighting the same enemy, the oil majors. And OPEC itself was modeled after the Texas Railroad Commission. So whether you want to talk about the principles of OPEC, it is an American principle. You want to talk about the creation of OPEC, it was announced in the United States.
So it was an agency created to fight back, to fight against big oil right? Am I understanding that correctly? And now people want to do away with it.
Absolutely. That's why the independent producers welcomed them, and they really kind of rolled the red carpet because everyone was against big oil. And now we are seeing people basically bad mouthing OPEC all the time, not realizing the history of it and how it's related to Texas in terms of modeling OPEC after the Texas Railroad Commission and the announcement of OPEC in May 1960.
How much has the agency or OPEC changed since the origin and the idea of it versus where it is today?
Uh, I think since 2016, the current Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia brought OPEC, which is of course now it's OPEC plus. OPEC is the group of 12 countries, and then OPEC plus is the group of 12 countries, then 10 additional countries being added to it that includes Russia and Kazakhstan. So that's 22 countries. So it's OPEC plus. What he did basically is they made changes, and with the help of the Saudi Energy Minister Abdulaziz bin Salman, who is the half brother of Mohammed bin Salman, they really kind of brought back OPEC to its origins, and they focused on the ultimate objectives. I'll explain that in a minute. But they brought it back because it did deviate from its objectives, and over the years basically kind of became, for a period of time it was useless, and for other periods basically people focus on the technicalities of it instead of focusing on the main objective. If you go back to 1959 and look at what the founders of OPEC, the Venezuelan oil minister, and the guy who became later the first Saudi oil minister, what they were talking about. Their objective was, aside from the big oil and the problems they have with the four partners of Aramco, that include, of course, what we know today as Chevron and ExxonMobil, the idea was very simple. We are very poor countries. We have only oil. We want to develop our countries, but we don't want them to depend on oil. So what we are going to do is, the first objective is to get rid of oil as soon as possible, to get rid of dependence on oil as soon as possible. People get shocked when you tell them the objective of OPEC is to get rid of dependence, but that's really what was the main objective. The main objective is to get rid of dependence on oil and develop the country and make it kind of more industrial, agricultural country, etc. But to do that, they need to sell the oil at what is considered a fair price, although I don't like this expression of a fair price. But they want some price. And their view was, one way to get the best price we can get is to match supply to demand at all times. What they are saying is, this is not a price maker. So this cannot be a cartel in a sense. This is not the price maker. If the demand for my products decline, then I cut production. If demand goes up, then I increase production. That's how I get the best prices available in the market. And of course, where they learned from that, they learned it from the Texas Railroad Commission. That's what the Railroad Commission was doing with the privately owned oil in Texas. So that's what they want. So what we've seen from the Saudi energy minister and the plans they had basically is they brought OPEC plus to the roots of OPEC, where they wanted to get rid of dependence on oil as soon as possible. That's part of the vision in Saudi Arabia 2030, and part of the vision of, if you look at the UAE, look at Oman, for example, all of those countries have the same idea that they want to reduce dependence on oil, just like the founders said in 1959. At the same time, if you notice that, they are always in the news because they meet every month and decide what to do. Well, that's the old idea, that I want to match supply to demand. In this way, I can guarantee the best price. So OPEC deviated for a while, and now it's back to the original roots.
How, if any, does the petrodollar play a part in Venezuela? Because if China is still buying the same amount at the discounted rate, do they now have to purchase it in dollars?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this because I missed talking about one point, how Trump basically was able to sell that oil. The point is very simple. They are not going to lift the sanctions on Venezuelan oil. And the sales that Trump wants to control has nothing to do with Chevron. It has to do with what we call the sanctioned oil. So they want to take the sanctioned oil, and sell it. And the idea here is if sanctions are on the books, then Venezuela cannot sell it because it's sanctioned, and anyone who is going to buy it is in violation of the sanctions. But if Venezuela hand that oil to the United States, then the United States can sell it to anyone. So they can avoid that legal issue. So if you are a foreigner and you want to buy U.S. or even a U.S. company, you want to buy it from the Trump administration, you are not violating any laws. So in this way, they can sidestep the legal issue. At the same time, they want to make sure that the money is not going to go to support some people in the regime that the Trump administration do not like, or because of corrupt officials, etc. They don't want them to get that money. So they don't want that. So in a sense, they achieve two objectives in this. Regarding the petrodollar issue, there was a lot of talk about it too among certain circles on how China is reacting and how the dollar is losing its market share relative to other currencies, etc. The bottom line on this is that, first of all, oil will remain priced in dollar. This is not a geopolitical issue. This is not a political decision. If you bring a group of people, pick up, let's say, 1,000 bankers from around the world, and tell them, look, find a solution. I don't want to price oil in dollar. Just kind of give me a solution. What I'm going to do. What you need basically to price oil in dollars or any other currency. You need to make sure that there is liquidity, there is a trust, and relative to other currencies, it has to have low volatility. And if you look around the world, you look at the liquidity, you look at the lower volatility. Again, we are talking about the relative volatility here. That does not fit any other currency. It doesn't. And Bitcoin or any other crypto does not fit. None of that fits. So even if you look at it from a very logical point of view, there is nothing but the dollar when it comes to trading oil. And of course, here we have to distinguish between two things. We have to distinguish between pricing oil in dollar and getting revenues in dollars. These are completely two different things. So the pricing of dollar, any way you look at it, the pricing of oil, it is in dollar. Any way you look at it. While you can sell your oil, like in Russia, for example, and get something else instead. So they can get the Chinese yuan, or they can get the Emirati dirham, or they can get anything else. In case of Iran, sometimes they get products, and they barter based on the price in dollars. So the price is one thing, getting revenues is something else. And here I would like to repeat what we talked about last time and on other shows. There are a lot of talk about that Saddam Hussein was killed because he tried to sell oil in non-dollar, and Gaddafi was killed because of that, etc. This is completely nonsense. Completely nonsense. The facts are not like that. None of them, not a single one, wanted to price oil in non-dollar. They did not talk about pricing oil in non-dollar. All what happened is that they asked to get their revenues in non-dollar. And when it comes to Saddam Hussein in particular, remember when I mentioned the oil for food deal and how the money was divided into three pockets? Those three pockets are in U.S. banks in the United States. So the United States have full control of the money, complete control. And what happened is Saddam Hussein experts told him, look, we have this money piling up in New York, and it's our money. We might get it in the future, but we are not getting it now. But the dollar is going down and the euro is going up. And we can make a lot of money because you are talking about hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars in money. We can make money while doing nothing by asking the UN to switch our funds to euros. So even if the Americans held the fund, the value will go up. It was that simple. And guess what? The Clinton administration agreed. So Saddam Hussein had no freedom, basically. He did not price oil in dollar. All he did, he asked the UN and the Clinton administration to switch his own fund that exists in banks in New York to euro. And that was it. And the Clinton administration agreed and they switched the money. And guess what? They made a lot of money out of it because the dollar went down and the euro went up. So why he got to, of course, those guys who believe in this conspiracy theory, they say, well, he got killed because of that. It does not make any sense. The same thing for Gaddafi. It's just the same exact idea. No one asked for oil to be priced in other currency. They cannot even do that. Now, if you look at the Shanghai exchange, oil in Shanghai exchange is priced in local currency. It's priced in yuan. And someone might say, well, look, you've been lecturing us for the last 10 minutes that oil is priced only in dollar, and now you come back and change your story and tell us that oil is priced in yuan in Shanghai. Well, guess what? It is a mirror image of what's happening in the exchange in Dubai in dollar. So all you are doing basically is just playing the exchange rates. But the pricing of oil is still in dollar, no matter what. You are just playing the exchange rate and saying, okay, well, instead of saying dollars, you say yuan. So anyway you look at it, the pricing is still in US dollars.
I want to talk about Iran, but I got one more quick question in regards to Venezuela and Cuba. So how will Cuba be impacted by this?
Generally speaking, Cuba basically had a deal with the Venezuelan government. And the deal basically is Venezuela will send oil to Cuba. And then, and by the way, the pricing of it is in dollar. And then Cuba basically will supply doctors in exchange of that oil. So that was the deal they made. Now they cut off Cuba from Venezuela, but we found out that Mexico is sending oil to Cuba with the blessing of the United States, with the blessing of the Trump administration. And the reason why is very simple. There is an agreement, despite all the animosity and the embargoes and everything else, there is an agreement. It's an old agreement. And both sides basically respect this agreement that the Cuban government will prevent Cubans from basically taking boats to Florida. So the job of the Cuban police or the army or the guards is to prevent Cubans from coming to the United States. And Cuba basically been fulfilling this because there was a time when thousands of Cubans just took those small boats and they came into Florida and they caused so many problems at that time, and the law changed and they came up with some crazy laws about whether the feet are touching the water or they are on the ground. And for those who are interested, you go to those details and just like you can see how crazy it got at that time. But the idea here is if you make the situation more miserable on the island, and then the government basically decides, okay, Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to flood Florida with 3 million Cubans. It will be a disaster. And not only a disaster, imagine what we have. We have the Secretary of State from Cuban origin. We have Senator Cruz in Texas from Cuban origin. And imagine that ICE basically is dealing with the Cubans the same way we've seen them dealing with people around, and how the Cuban community is going to react to that. So the Trump administration is fully aware of these issues. They don't want any trouble. While they want to see change in Cuba, they don't want a flood of refugees coming to the United States.
So for now, you see the Cuban government will remain intact.
It looks like it. I mean, I'm going to mention something since you want to move to Iran, and I want to mention this regarding all those countries. It seems that probably the best case for everyone is literally to have a change similar to Syria and Venezuela. Because whatever happened in Venezuela basically is similar to what happened in Syria. You remove the guy on top and his cronies, but you keep the system the same. And then the system basically will literally switch 180 degrees. That's exactly what happened in Syria. That's what we see in Venezuela today. So when you talk about Iran, for example, you talk about Cuba, you talk about refugees, you talk about problems, you talk about in Iran, for example, we have several ethnic groups. They might end up fighting with each other because all the minorities in Iran basically are well armed. You don't want a total collapse of the regime, etc. Once you start looking at it that way, you realize that what happened in Syria and what happened in Venezuela basically it was good for everyone, because you avoid another bloodshed in both countries when the regime changed. So when you talk about Cuba, probably you need something like this. When you talk about Iran, probably you need something like this. Because one of the issues, and I will kind of be ahead of your question on Iran, one of the issues about Iran, that there was a lot of talk, a lot of hype in the last 10 days about Iran. A lot of hype, whether on TV, on social media, etc. And people do not realize the following. There is not a historical evidence that show that demonstrations topple regimes or change regimes. Okay, not a single evidence. And what happened? They say, well, no, Alhajji, you are wrong because look at Tunisia, look at Egypt. No, in Tunisia and Egypt, it was the army that made the decision. It wasn't the demonstrators. So the army basically decided that's it, and they asked the president to leave. So you need the army. In fact, if you go back to Iran, 1979, when Khomeini came to power, the only way he was able to come to power because the Iranian army let the Shah out, and it welcomed Khomeini. It was the army. Yet demonstrations in Iran at that time, they were way, way bigger than what we see today, and they lasted for 2 years. 2 years. And people being killed by the Savak every single day. So why people think from demonstrations of 2 weeks the regime will collapse? That was a complete nonsense. At the same time, no country in the region wanted the regime collapse without a substitute. And there are many reasons why this is important. One of them, for example, there is an area between Pakistan and Iran called Baluchistan. This is a completely different ethnic group there. They've been fighting for their independence for a long time. And the Pakistani government basically been crashing them. And there are some minority, Baluch minority, on the border between Pakistan and Iran. If the regime collapses and there is no government, then the Pakistani Baluch will use the Iranian part as a launching pad against the Pakistani government. And it will be a disaster for the Pakistani government and the Pakistani army because they have to be busy with some domestic issues and they can get the arms, because they have access to the sea, they can get the arms and everything else. So Pakistan does not want a regime change in Iran unless you have a replacement. The same thing for Turkey. And Turkey basically fears that if there is a regime collapse, then they will have flood of millions of Iranians to Turkey. They already have experience with the 4 million Syrian refugees that came in, and before that the Iraqis, but they don't want any more refugees. At the same time, they are afraid that the Kurds, who've been having serious problems with Turkey forever, that they will come in and they will come with their arms and cause problems in Turkey. So Turkey has does not want to see a regime change in Iran unless there is some really good plan where Iran will not disintegrate. Iraq basically has no interest in the regime change for several reasons, of course. Probably they have more reasons than any other country, simply because they depend heavily on Iran for energy imports. That's one. They don't want that to be cut off. At the same time, because of religious issues, they have some connections, and there are militias in Iraq that are supported by Iran, etc. So they don't want the instability in Iran to move to Iraq. And then the other Gulf countries on the other side, they are scared to death from the flood of Iranian refugees. Iran has 90 million people, or more than 90. So a flood of 5 million, this is more than the population of some of the Gulf states. So they don't want that either. So when President Trump retreated yesterday and said, he does not want to attack, probably there was a lot of pressure from those countries on him because they can see where the problems are if the regime collapses. So no one wants that regime collapse without a good, powerful replacement in place. And when we talk about replacement, we got to be very careful here, because when the United States left Afghanistan, whom they left Afghanistan with? With the most powerful group on the ground that can keep the peace. When in Syria, who is the president of Syria right now? They give it to the guy who is the most powerful on the ground. So you want someone powerful on the ground to take over. And those guys, especially the Iranian diaspora around the world, they don't have that power on the ground. Who had the power on the ground? It's basically it's the Revolutionary Guards and the military and everyone else. So probably they can have some splinters of those groups basically can control. But the whole idea here is, if people think that in a very civilian way you go and rule Iran, probably they need to study history.
It's because everybody thinks we're in a superhero movie on us. They think that this is Jason Bourne or James Bond. I've been saying this on every one of my shows, but I mean, the stuff I read that people write, it's unbelievable how this is all just so easy. Let me ask you, how would this also impact Russia and China in terms of the amount of oil that they receive from Iran if there was a regime change or any type of collapse of the government? And what is their interest in not allowing this to happen?
I think this is one of the most important points of the show today. If we end up with attack on Iran, in the first war in June, the 12-day war, President Trump warned Netanyahu not to hit the oil production facilities and not to hit the crude export terminals. Why? Because Trump wants oil prices to remain low. He does not want them to go up. And Netanyahu basically did hit some energy facilities, but he did not hit the production platforms. He did not hit the ports. We might see exactly the same right now, because Trump does not want to see high prices. But here is the issue. There are at least 60 million barrels of Iranian oil on ships, whether on ships moving around or floating storage, when the main importer of Iranian oil is China. So China has access to this 60 million plus oil So even if Iranian oil stops completely, they still have 60 million. That is enough if they want to continue everything as is without any problems. That is enough to compensate for imports from Iran for about I was almost speaking in Arabic here, 45 days. So they can go on with 45 days. Of course, the war is not expected to last 45 days, but the chaos could last more than that. So that's number one. Number two, China was well aware of all Trump's moves, whether on the sanctions, on the tariffs, on Venezuela, and Iran. All the evidence basically point to this fact that they were always ahead of the game, ahead, even when it comes to tariff and it comes to the trade wars. In Venezuela, for example, even before Trump moved and for the blockade, they imported more than 20 million barrels, and they are in floating storage right now from Venezuela. And at the same time, they officially stopped importing oil from Venezuela. And the word officially here is important. And then they switched to other sources. So they went and started importing more from Western Canada, which almost the same quality crude of the Venezuelans. So they were ahead in the game. So if there is an attack on Iran, China built the highest level of inventories, oil inventories ever. As of 2 weeks ago, it was at record high, more than 1.2 billion barrels. So between their inventories, between oil on ships, between floating storage, China is safe in the probably first 3-4 months without any problems. The issue becomes in the medium term and after that. And the irony here is, if China, let's say there is an attack on Iran tomorrow and we lose all the Iranian oil, and China uses its inventories, that will prevent oil prices from skyrocketing. But 3-4 months later, China basically has no additional oil to use, then they will start importing. If Iranian oil is not there, then oil prices will rocket, will literally skyrocket. Is that a problem? It's just before the midterm elections. So the timing for Trump is really bad. And he cannot have it both ways. He cannot basically attack Iran and blockade Venezuela and then expect oil prices not to go up. We've seen what happened in recent days. Just on the expectations that there will be an attack on Iran, oil prices went up by about $5. And the moment he said there will be no attack, we lost $3. So he cannot have it both ways. But the bottom line on Iran is that the impact on oil prices in the short run is just the sentiment at which is the sentiment is between $3 to $7, but that is it. And if the Iranian ports are hit, then oil prices will go even higher. And if we end up with occupation, of course, that will be a completely different stage of things. And that's going to be very bloody on one hand, and it will be very costly for the world economy on the other.
Based upon what you've said over the last, well, in terms of Iran, the last 25 minutes or so, doesn't sound like they're going to move forward with any type of attack.
Can you predict what President Trump will do tomorrow? Who can predict what President Trump will do tomorrow? So that's really the issue. The confusion we have among all the industries and among even people who are close to the White House. And if you talk to a lot of people who wants to invest and all this stuff, the issue is no one knows what he is going to do tomorrow. And that causing volatility in the market, not only in the oil market, in all markets. So yes, we've seen him change his mind, but who knows?
And Russia's role in all this, are they in the same boat in relation to China to not allow, it's in their interest to not let Iran fall?
Well, Russia basically be losing big anyway on several fronts, but we've seen them basically lose in Syria, and but they played their game and they still have their military base there. They are still exporting their oil. We did not see a major decline in Russian exports. At the same time, there is some new development that's kind of very strange, and I don't know how to explain it. Um, for some reason, Russian oil to Asia goes through the Red Sea and literally passes Bab el-Mandeb in front of the Houthis, and the Houthis will do nothing simply because of an agreement between the Russians and the Houthis. The problem is, since January 2024, what we've seen is Russians can send their crude, but they cannot send their LNG. So Russian LNG carriers or carriers that are carrying the Russian LNG will go around Africa to reach China. And the question is why? Why oil can go through but no LNG? All of a sudden now, after the meeting between President Trump and Putin in Alaska, we started seeing some going through the Red Sea. We don't know whether this is by agreement or Russia basically is trying to, or Russia and China basically are trying to force the Trump administration to act in a way where they provoke them to do something bad. We don't know. So as we speak, the fourth LNG carrier is right now in the Red Sea, going to China. And the idea that it may not be arranged between Russia and the United States because none of the tankers announced their destination. All of them are ending up in China anyway, but they are not announcing their destination. Because if there was an agreement, they would have announced their destination. So the question is, are they trying to provoke the United States? Because the U.S. Navy is there. And these are tankers carrying sanctioned LNG from sanctioned plants in Russia. So they are sanctioned. But are they trying to provoke the United States? I don't know. But this is still, we need some more information on how those carriers basically are able to go through the Red Sea, and they were not able to do it in 24 and 25.
I know we said an hour. We might have to, if you come back, we talk about AI and data centers, because I think that's going to be another focal point for the midterms, I've been told.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Where can people find you?
Well, generally speaking, the easiest way is they can find me on Twitter. I put a lot of things on Twitter. We do have a couple of subscriptions, both of them on Substack. One is intended for individuals, and it's only $420 a year. They get the daily energy report, which we publish every working day. And then we have the newsletter. The newsletter is directed at companies and institutions. It's more expensive than that. So those are the two major publications that we publish. At the same time, I would like to urge those who follow me on Twitter, just like I did last time, that I do put a lot of things in Arabic. And in Arabic, basically, we have a publication called Ataqa, which is the only media outlet that focuses on energy in Arabic. We have 32 employees, 21 journalists. They put a lot of materials that do not exist anywhere else in the world. And many reports, many breaking news, etc. And these news basically are important to traders, important to investors, and I retweet their products. So all you got to do is use that translate function in Twitter. This is one of the best things about Twitter, that you can use the translate function. If you are in the United States, you get the translation automatically once you click on that tweet. But if it doesn't, just click that translate button and it translates the tweet. And if you want to read the articles, basically you just switch your browsers to the language you want, and you get all the news that you don't get anywhere else.
I encourage everyone to support Anas and what he's doing, the work he's putting out. Subscribe to his Substack. Make sure you follow him on X. And I appreciate it. It's good to see you again. And I appreciate you taking the time. Mic drop.
Have a great day.